Portions of the following program may be pre-recorded and is sponsored by People Help the People.
Welcome to the Joey and Shiloh Show, your one-stop destination for laughter, inspiration, and triumph. This dynamic duo tackles life head-on and has a good time while doing it. So whether you're looking for a pick-me-up after a long day or seeking inspiration to overcome your own obstacles, you're in the right place. Now sit back and relax, because here come your hosts, Joey and Shiloh.
Good morning, San Diego. This is Shiloh from the Joey and Shiloh Show. Me and Joey there was miscommunication this week, and so we will have one of our co-hosts doing the show today, and that co-host is me. So good morning, and we love you guys. I'm excited. I'm gonna talk today a little bit more about kind of my life and how me and Joey ended up on the radio. And so I hope you guys find it entertaining or just fun. And so so it's funny because me and Joey, we've known each other for about 12 years. I met Joey because I was teaching his son karate, and from that, we had a friendship that grew, and I'm blessed to call him one of my best friends. And one time, this was about 6 years ago, he had an idea to do a podcast. And so he called me, he's like, "Hey, do you want to do a podcast?" And I said, "Sure." And so, he was up in Temecula at the time, and I was down in San Diego. So I drove up, and he had a friend there with the camera and a couple of microphones, and we ended up talking for about maybe 45 minutes. And we recorded it. We didn't have any clue with what we were going to do with it, but it kind of started this little journey that we've been on. And so, fast forward to that night, and then a couple months later, he had a boardroom in the office he was at, and we would do the same thing. We'd set up a camera and we would talk. And it was funny because, we would tell people, we had a podcast when all we had was a camera, but we liked talking. And so, we kind of did that on and off for a few more months, and then he ended up moving down to San Diego, and this is fast forwarding to about probably a year and a half ago. And it still gets me because then we took it more serious, where we'd set the camera up, but then we set up a YouTube. So we started uploading some of our conversations to YouTube, and all the while we just got the biggest kick out of it. We didn't really think, we didn't really know if we had a skill or if it was just we were completely blind to reality, but we enjoyed it. And so we ended up meeting somebody from church who had a recording studio, and shout out to Caleb. And we told him about our idea we had and how we'd done, at that point we probably did five or six uploads to YouTube. And again, no topics, we didn't know what we were doing. We just were having a good time doing it. And Caleb had a whole setup, and so he helped us record whole shows, and we kind of had a couple topics, and so he recorded it for us, and then we had a few fully recorded episodes of our podcast. We call it the Joey and Shiloh Show, and then fast forward about 6 months. This is about a year ago. The story's kind of boring, but it's funny. We met someone who could help us get the recorded shows up on YouTube and then Spotify and Apple. And so the idea that we had a long time ago actually kind of started coming to fruition without us really even knowing it. And then we were on Spotify. And so and all the while, me and Joey just thought this is the funniest thing because we didn't really have a plan or a goal. And so fast forward to about 6 months ago, 4, 5, 6 months ago maybe. And I met with a friend who he had a radio show, and he didn't know we did a podcast. And I told him, yeah, we did a podcast. And then that is how we kind of started talking with Salem. And next thing we know, we have a live show Sunday mornings at 9 that sometimes we forget about. And so we, for all 36,000 of you downloaders out there, we love you. Thank you guys for being a part of the journey. And me and Joey, I just got off the phone with them. But this is a total God thing for us. And this is what I mean by that. We're not slick enough to think that we know what we're doing. Really, me and Joey started having conversations probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and they were, because we're pretty light and funny guys, but they started getting pretty heavy, and they started getting pretty real. And at that time, I was going through a divorce, and I had just recently been out of rehab, and so my life kind of, my life turned upside down. And Joey was really one of my best friends, and we would just talk, and we've both done therapy, and I listen to a ton of podcasts, and we do what we can to just get in a better place mentally. But me and Joey found a lot of, I think the words relatability or magic in just talking to each other. And it helped. And I mean, there were some dark days for sure where I don't think either one of us had answers, but we just started talking to each other. And there was something about when you have somebody that you can talk to, it helps you kind of shoulder the load. It's just one more day. And so we don't like to be overly bleak. I think we both realize that life is full of ups and downs, and sometimes the downs are just a little bit harder than what we maybe thought they would be. And so, the heart of this show is just to be almost like a listening ear. I don't think either one of us have answers. I think between us both, we have, maybe 6 junior college credits. And so we're definitely not skilled in helping people, but me and Joey have found a lot of solace in just talking. And so that's kind of it's a passion. It's a thing of passion, that we started doing, and here we are. And so it's Sunday morning, and, we are excited to be here, and I wanted to share with you guys kind of a little bit more about my personal journey. And I've hinted at it and kind of talked, not in detail, but kind of what I've gone through. That was really kind of the launching point for a lot of me and Joey's conversations. But so to get right into it, I grew up in a great home, very blessed. Both my mom and dad love Jesus. I grew up in the church. I was very, very blessed by that. They've been married for 35 years. They have a very accomplished ministry that reaches children across the world. And I've been just super blessed to have the family that I have. And just God's always had me. And I think some of you out there know what I'm talking about, I just get lucky. I grew up in a good home. Things just always seem to work for me. And so life was good. Life was never bad, but I ended up enjoying drinking. Drinking was very fun for me. And what started out as kind of, it was like fun, it was harmless fun. There wasn't really a whole lot to it. Some nights I drank more than I should, but it was always a good time. And so that was kind of where life started getting a little bit, what's the word? Hairy, because I came from, and what I've learned to describe it as is it's like, some people, they have, like people love the stories where, it's like 42-0 and it's the fourth quarter, and, they end up coming back and winning. And that's, personally, that's my dad's story. My dad was able to make it through crazy circumstances, and, give me the best life he could, me and my siblings the best life. And he made it through crazy adversary something. But, and what I've learned to say is it's like, when you get launched and you come from a good family, it's like you give up a big lead. It's, it's like it was, 32-0 in my favor. And then I just, for whatever reason, life and this and that, I blew the lead. And there's like a guilt that comes with that, because you're doing what you shouldn't, and everyone's watching, and it's like, oh, it shouldn't be the way it is. And so, but what I mean by that is I just, drinking led me to a really sad kind of dark place. And, it wasn't always like that. It started out fun, it was just going out with the boys or, watching a game, and it was fun, and there was no problems. And then, eventually, all said and done, I've been on the show Cops twice, and I've been arrested probably 10 or 11 times. And so I had a good run with it. But, fast forward to 2020, and I was drinking way more than I wanted to, and it became a big problem. And again, too, coming, as a Christian, it's like I'd be in church, and all the promises were yes and amen, and you're doing all this. And for me, it was this conflict. It was like this weird dichotomy, because it was going, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm like doing something I know I shouldn't. And I don't know if anybody knows, but it's like eating me up on the inside. Like, I just wish it was, I wish I could stop, or I wish I could do it less. And so that was, and the worst part was people started finding out. It didn't take away from who I was. People still thought I was a good guy, and, my family name was still intact, but I was doing a good job of really kind of blowing it. And it just, on the inside, it just hurt, because I knew I wasn't living up to my potential, and I was like a potential guy. And some of you may be that, where it's like, man, this guy's got so much potential, and for me, people ended up finding out that I did drink, and there'd be some stories, and there was like, oh yeah, if he could just figure that out, if he could just figure that out, he'd do so well. And it was frustrating, because even though I had so much drive and ambition, I couldn't stop drinking, or I couldn't drink less. And what started out as kind of something I could do without anybody knowing, people started finding out more and more. And by people, I mean my friends, particularly. I got calls and texts, and I was like, hey man, like, we kind of hear, we've been hearing stuff. And it was like, yeah, no, I'm good, guys. I'm good. I promise I'm good. I just have to start, I just work out more, and I got to get back to working out, and it just, I didn't have like any solutions. It kind of just snowballed into something. And it was very sad, because it used to be fun, and then it wasn't really fun anymore, but I couldn't stop. And so, I know about what that feels like. Anybody out there who, whether you're in that place, or you've got a friend or a family member, it's like, can't you just stop? Or, if you loved me, couldn't you just stop? Or, it's like you've got this great job, or you've got, a child or a couple of kids, and it's like, can't you just stop? And those were the hardest conversations, because I really wanted to, and I meant to. And, I leave those conversations so defeated, because it was like, what's wrong with me? Like, why, if I really did love this person, or if I really did care enough, I would just stop. And I couldn't. And so, that led me to a place where I ended up having, in 2020, going into treatment. And it was a total God thing, because I've talked about it, sometimes, with me and Joe on the show, but like, I remember, guys, this is going to sound, silly, but I remember, telling my first wife at the time, like, God's going to heal me, right? Like, grace is going to come through. And I tell my family that too. And they were like, yeah, but are you going to stop? And I was like, well, and I banked on God because I knew the life that I wanted to live and how I was living. I didn't know how I was going to get there, but I know God's good and I know God's big. And so there was just this, it was almost like a secret prayer where I was like, God, you've split the Red Sea. Like, you've done a lot of things. If you could perchance by some way, if you could help me, because I don't necessarily know if I even want to stop, but if you could, that would be great. And that prayer was answered. And June 29th, 2020 was my last drink. And I ended up going into a treatment center, and I realized that I had a condition where when I put alcohol in my body, I can't process it, and I have a mind that doesn't believe it. And so it's been a beautiful journey out of that. Once I became aware and accepted that, and there was, and me and Joey talk about a lot, but reaping and sowing. And one thing I want to make sure I'm very clear is, the grace of God, it's unmerited favor. We can't do anything for it. He just does it for us. But that doesn't take away from consequences. It doesn't, like, I had to walk through a lot of the wreckage that I caused. Yes, I got my miracle. And by the grace of God, I'm sober today, but it did not come without consequences. And so I know there's, I wouldn't say a lot, but there's people that, when you talk about grace and you talk about God doing things, it's almost like, yeah, but, God's you got to pay for it. And I'm going, yeah, you do. But for me in my life, it's never, my consequences never outweighed the goodness of God. And what I mean by that is, I love that saying that you cannot you can't, well, it's not over. You can't oversimplify how small the devil is when you compare him to how good God is. And for me, that's the case in my life. No matter how much you want to talk about the bad in my life, God's just so much bigger. And again, I'm not belittling the consequences. I'm not belittling the things that I did, because I caused a lot of wreckage. And, I don't say that lightly. There's still things that I go through, even sober today, but things that I caused many years ago. I still have to face a lot of that. And by the grace of God, it's getting less and less. But, when the Bible talks about sin, there's a weight of sin, and it's like, we can't get away from that, and I'm, I happen to believe like just, for me in my life and, stuff with God, I remember there was a time where, because I grew up in the church, I was saved when I was 4. I remember coming home from a Sunday night church service, and Greg Laurie was on the radio, and he said, do you want to live in heaven with Jesus forever? And I was like, yeah. And you have to accept Jesus in your heart. And it was crystal clear as a 4-year-old. I just understood. I was like, yeah, I want Jesus to live in my heart. I want to go to heaven. And I was saved when I was 4, and, praise God. But I didn't realize till much later in my life that there's things that I had to wrestle through on my own. And the big one was righteousness, because I didn't realize, righteousness is right standing with God. And that's not based on anything I did or I'll ever do. My righteousness is based on what Jesus did on the cross. He took my sin and he gave me his righteousness. And so I was working for something for a long time. And when God showed me that I was working for something I already had, it was very freeing. It was a crazy experience, because it's what I always wanted. I thought I had to do better and be better as a Christian. And I learned that Jesus did it for me. And so I always like to point back to Jesus and what he's done for me. But a lot of times I feel like sometimes that gets lost in translation of going, well, Shiloh, because you talk a lot about Jesus, you're making little of your sin. And it's like, no, I'm not making little of my sin. I'm making a lot about Jesus, because where sin abounds, grace is all the more. And that's really kind of like, my story, is where I've blown it. And it's like Joseph, like Joseph, unfortunately, he didn't cause any of the things that happened to him. They were caused to him, but God still worked it all out for his good. And, in my life, I've caused the things that have happened to me, but God has still worked it out for his good. And so, me and Joey started kind of talking about a few of these things. In fact, I thought about this the other day, but Joey was my first call in rehab. There was like a little payphone, and I remember writing a few numbers down. And so me and Joey kind of just been walking through this together, and it's been a special thing. And you know what? I hope all of you out there, I pray and hope you guys have somebody, kind of like the relationship that me and Joey have, where you don't necessarily fix things. You just get to talk about them with somebody. Because I think there's a healing that happens in that space. And we joke and we make light of how much we love therapy, because we do. But, I think when you just have somebody you can talk to and get stuff off, I think a huge, at least for me, I can speak to it. A lot of it's bigger in my head than it is like real. And so getting a lot of those things off of my chest and out of my head, I feel lighter. And it's not that I solve any answers. It's not that, my life is better. It's just I got to tell somebody that. And so that's kind of really it was out of that this radio show was born, and the podcast was born, of just two people that are very imperfect, and they talk about what they're going through. And we've noticed a lot of, for me, it's health. I feel better, when me and Joey talk, I feel better. And it's not necessarily that we actually ever solve anything, but we just talk about things. And so that's kind of, that's the heart of this show, you guys. And so, if you guys have anything that you guys are going through and you just want to talk about it, we'd love to hear emails, or, you can call us. The emails info@thejoeyandshilohshow.com. And, we're not here to give any advice. We're not here to tell you what to do, but we are a listening ear. And I know how, I know how important that's been in my life. And so I don't mean to paint an overly bleak picture. We have really, really good lives. I'm so blessed now. And God continues to just blow me away with how good he is. And I don't mean that in a cheesy way. It's God is so good. And so that's kind of that's how we got here today. We got here today because there's two broken people that ended up talking about their brokenness together. And it sounds weird, but like, we go to, we go to church, and we go to men's prayer, and we talk with other Christians. And, me and Joey just kind of found this kind of cool spot where it was like, okay, we'll tell those people some things, but the real stuff we'll kind of tell each other. And there's a few other people in our circle. So that is where we are today, guys. And so I wanted to share that with you. So we're going to take a quick break, and I hope to hear from some of you today on the call-in. So we will be back. Welcome back. It is Shiloh with the Joey and Shiloh Show. Well, enough of the emo Nemo. No, not really. But the other thing I wanted to talk about today is, because me and Joey talk often about Jesus, and we talk about faith, and we talk about Christianity, and we touch on some things, and we haven't really got into, I think, deeper theological discussions, but it's on purpose, and because we both have our walks with Jesus. We both have grown up in the church, but there's, it's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world. And I personally believe everyone's got an opinion, but maybe not a right to share it. And right now in life, so many people have opinions, and it's like, sometimes I feel like opinions outweigh truth by just sheer volume. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's got, their opinion of what you should do or what you shouldn't do. And so I personally, I just like to be quiet, on certain subjects and topics, because I'm good with Jesus, and Jesus is good with me. I think it's an old song. Jesus is still all right with me. But I will take a little bit of time to tell you guys how I got to where I got. And it started in, I went on a YWAM DTS. And if you're not familiar with that, neither was I. And I had no idea that it was missionary work. And so I ended up accidentally being in the Amazon basin for 2 months and doing missionary work. And I remember my first couple of days there was another kid with me, and it was like this weird Christian contest of like who could save more people. And he had this like radical conversion one day of this kid who was like, I guess he was smoking a bunch of weed and his parents were mad at him. And, he found out that the white Christians were in town. And so he went down and he ended up getting saved. And I remember I was so mad. I was so freaking angry that this kid who I was in a contest with, and it was an unspoken contest, mind you, but that he got this really cool conversion. And so, I had the kids the next day, and I just hit a home run talking about joy. And I think like 40 kids raised their hands. And so, I like looked at him and winked, and it was like, it's 40-1, bud. But, no, not really. But that's kind of like where I was. I operated out of a deficit with God, and I had to do for him, and I had to do for him. And when I read a book that it just went into the implications of what Jesus did and what that meant for me, something in me changed. And how the story goes, why God is so cool. And this is, and we talked about like last week, but if you guys are going through something and it's like, I personally it never helped me when people were like, just do. Like the right thing with Christianity, it just didn't. I like, for me, it's like when you see a sign on the lawn that says, don't walk on it. I just walked on it. And so, that was just kind of the cloth I was cut from. And so, with God, it was kind of always like that. It was like, just don't. And God did something in my life that kind of, I learned who he was, from him doing it. It wasn't anything I did. It was what he did. And so that, as the story goes, I was in Brazil, and, I was fasting, and I was a horrible faster because I was just angry all day. And, I was trying to read a lot, and me and this guy were in a contest, Bible reading, unspoken, naturally. But, I was just doing. And it was just so draining. Like, it was just, I was miserable. And I was trying to like force the work of God. And I remember we were praying for people for healing. And there was one day we went out, prayed for like 5 or 6 people, and none of them got healed. And we were walking back to the house, and I was like, hey guys, I need a minute. And they were like, what? And I was like, I got to go talk to God real quick. And I let God have it in a field in Brazil. And I said, you are embarrassing yourself, and you're embarrassing us, because we came out here to heal people and you're not doing anything. And so I hope you're okay with that you're making yourself look silly. And it was the first time that I really actually kind of told God how I felt. And it was weird because I felt wrong. And what I've come to learn is I believe God actually really likes that. And when we talk to God like we talk to other people, because first of all, he knows our thoughts. And so he's not surprised. And I don't personally think he's not surprised at swear words. And so, there's been times where I've talked to God and I've used a lot of swear words. And, I happen to think he's gracious and big enough, and he understands where I'm at. And so anyway, and we're in Brazil, and I'm just striving, and I'm fasting, and I'm trying to speak in tongues, and I don't know if it's working, and I'm trying to be prophetic, and I don't know if that's working either. And everyone I'm praying for is not getting healed. And I'm getting in fights with the other missionaries. And we had a translator, and I ended up getting in a big disagreement with him one day playing soccer. And so he didn't want to talk to me anymore, which is weird because, when you're preaching and somebody's translating for you and they don't like you, it gets really awkward. And so if you guys are planning on going to a foreign country where you have a translator, I would suggest you don't get in a heated argument and a screaming match over the soccer fields and then have him translate for you that night, because that's just a little bit uncomfortable. But there was a day we had in prayer, and I tried to be prophetic, and we were reading books on how to hear from God and stuff like that. And none of it seemed to work for me. And I was sincere as one person possibly could be, but it just didn't work for me. And I didn't know why. And I was okay with it. I was like, whatever, God, I get it. I just, and we got prayed for the Holy Spirit to come over us one day. And I was like the first person to stand up, and the guy was like, does anybody want the Holy Spirit, to be baptized? And I was me, and I want the whole thing. I want to fall over, all that. And, to my surprise, it was like probably 30 minutes into this prayer meeting. I look around, because I was praying the whole time. I look around and the whole room's laid out, and I'm the only one standing. And I'm like, oh wait, no, God, smite me. I want to feel it. Like whatever this, however everyone else is falling down, I want that too. And, I just didn't go down and I wanted to. And, I'm very clever because I left that thinking, well, you know what? That guy just didn't have enough of the Holy Spirit to knock me over. So it's not me, it's him. And that's just kind of how a lot of those stories went, where I was like the odd one out with God. And I, to be honest, I still feel like that sometimes. There's been situations where it's like, people will pray and, something happens for them, and, not all the time, but oftentimes, I'm like, well, not me. And I've learned more recently that's just a matter of belief. I just have to stay believing, even when it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Stay believing, because the Bible is littered with people that stayed believing against all odds, and they ended up seeing God come through. And so I've been able to, by the grace of God, kind of wear that. But so back to Brazil. So we were in a prayer one day, and I felt like I got this name, and his name was Peter. And I felt so holy, but I had blown it a couple times with trying to be prophetic, and we had a great group of guys out there. So like I would say, I'd go up and be like, dude, I feel like God's telling me to tell you something. And they were like, oh yes, what is it? Lay it on me. And I'd give it to them, and they'd start laughing. And I was like, okay, well maybe I missed it. And they're like, no, well, I'm believing for it, and so I was used to kind of not, just the whole thing not working out. But there's one, I got this name Peter, and, it was like 4 or 5 times, prior to that, I just kind of missed the boat. And so I went up to one of the guys I was with, and I was like, buddy, I know I keep saying things, but like, I'm just going to say it again. And I think I got it named Peter. And he started laughing. And, I was like, I just want to tell you, I don't know, we're 2 more gathered just in case something does happen. And so, and I tend to be very anxious, and I tend to be very stressful, and, I'm a doer. And so the rest of the, after that was in the morning, and, we were just going around like praying for people and just doing, missionary stuff, which, by the way, I'm not a good missionary. I'm not good at it. I don't like foreign countries. I don't like dirt, and I don't like outdoors. And so I don't know why I was in Brazil, but praise God. And we're walking around, and every kid I could see, I went up to that day and asked them their name. What's your name? What's your name? Because I was looking for Peter, and I'm going to harness the power of God. And so it was like dozens of kids, and I could feel myself striving. I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do this. And it was uncomfortable, and it was not easy. It was like, and eventually, like halfway through the day, this girl said, Pedra. And I was like, okay, God, the female version of Peter, Pedra. Oh, here it is. And what, I'm going to pray for her. What are we going to do today? And nothing happened. And, I was like, okay, God, well, maybe that was it, maybe, and one thing I'm going to encourage myself, and maybe you guys too, but there's a difference between good and God. And that's one thing I'm walking through right now is sometimes it's so close and it feels so good, but it's just not God. And what I mean by that is we know in our heart of hearts, it says, go, like, trust your gut. We know when things are like, we know what awe is, we know what amazement is. And sometimes it's not that. It's whatever happens is good, but it's not that amazement. It's not that wow. It's not that heartfelt, holy crap. And so, stay believing for that amazement to come, because I believe God's big enough to do it. But so as the story goes, we kept going that day, and we were walking around. I kept asking kids their names, and I was like, maybe Pedro was the one God wanted. I was kind of like disappointed. I was like, whatever, God, again. And then I get in a big argument and basically get kicked, out of the group again. And so I had to go back to make dinner that night. And so, I'm on the way home. I remember it was a Friday night, and I was just so annoyed, and everyone was wrong and I was right. And the argument, they were all wrong and they were all stupid heads and I was the right one. And, so me and, of all people, Michael, were walking back to the house that night, and I was like livid. I forget what the argument was, but they kicked me out and I had to go back to the house. And so we're on our way back, and I'd completely forgot about the Peter thing. I was just so in a fit of passion. And there was this group of kids playing football, football, but soccer. And this group of kids came up to me. And for the only time that I can remember in the 2 months I was in Brazil, this kid came up to me and he asked me my name. And all day I had been going up to kids asking them their name, specifically to find this one kid, and which I did not find. But he came up and he's like, "What's your name?" And I was like, "Meu nome é Chuchu." And because in Brazil, Chuchu was easier than Shiloh, and so I just went by Chuchu. And I was like, "What's your name?" And he said, "Meu nome is Peter." And I was standing next to Michael. I was like, "Michael, I think I found Peter." But then instantly I was like, what do I got to do? I got to save this kid. Cause my parents have a ministry and they literally save kids around the world. And I was like, I'm going to save them. And, as the story goes, he just ran off and continued playing, soccer with his friends, and me and Michael kept walking. But I was so anxious and I was so stressed. And I was like, God, that was the kid, right? Like, you gave me this name. And again, too, guys, if you're listening, like, the prophetic or like words of knowledge or all this, if you don't get it, neither do I. So it's, I'm not saying that I'm a super saint by any means. When I've heard God talk, because it's such a bold thing, I heard, God talk. A lot of times it's a thought, and I don't necessarily know if it's me or if it's, the universe, or if it's, I don't know what it is. It could be the caffeine. And so it's never, you're never batting 1,000, but I do believe that God will get to us and he'll get through us if we're just willing. And so there's a little bit of, there's a little bit of leeway that, you kind of got to work through. But so anyway, I was like, well, God, what the heck was that? I met this kid, Peter. I had this name, I had enough faith to tell this other guy, maybe this, but we were walking home and I was stressed. I was like, oh my gosh, I missed it. I was supposed to save him, maybe, I didn't, and I remember Michael was like, well, dude, I just think God just wanted to show you that. I was like, Michael, you simpleton, you don't understand. You don't realize how smart I am. I'm profound. But then it was in that moment I felt like God told me again, and he said, Shiloh, I just did that to show you how big I am. And then I had this sense of awe and amazement, and it was an overwhelming sense of, oh my gosh. And God just kind of reminded me of going, there was nothing you could do to arrange that. That was me. And I want you to realize how big I am. And after that, that encounter was what I bank, God on. That situation that happened that day, there was too many, it was too, like, because I love coincidences or God's way of saying anonymous, but I couldn't have I couldn't have on my own, like, drum that up. And, if you're listening, it's like, well, dude, it's just a name. I get it, and I don't necessarily think it was a profound move of God, but I think God is oftentimes in the mundane. And so for me, that was just a huge moment where I was like, God, you are real, aren't you? And he was like, yeah. And I'm very big, and I'm in a lot of control. And so what ended up happening through that experience was my faith in the living God, a living God, started to grow, because I wanted to see something beyond me, bigger than me, happen, and it did. And it was so cool of God, because really after that, what God showed me is, and I like wrote it down, and I just felt like God said, I'm big. I'm a big God. And then you go to the Bible, and it's funny because the God of the Bible was a big God, and his name for the big God, the all-powerful, was El Shaddai. And he happened to split seas. And, there's so many crazy stories, like the story where Joshua told God, he's like, God, stop the sun from setting so I can kill all these people. And God stopped the sun from setting so Joshua could kill all these people. Like, there's crazy stories in the Bible about God, that the things he can do. And so I know for me, I haven't seen that kind of those crazy things, and maybe you have, and I'm genuinely happy for people, because I know that God heals people, and I know that God provides supernatural resource, and I know, and I've heard those stories my whole life. My parents, they have story after story after story of checks ending up in the mail, or checks on on the windshield, and healing, and like, I believe all that. But for me, I had to see it in my own life for me to call it real. And so I believe God's big enough to do that. And so, that was kind of for me, because I knew what to say in church, going to church, I was down with it. I knew how to, but it wasn't real to me. And so that encounter made it all real. And, it's been pretty cool to see what God's done since then, because my life has been littered with problems ever since then. And I don't necessarily think following Jesus looks like your life gets easier. I think, when you realize what righteousness is, and the gift and the work of Jesus, it gives you a profound sense of peace. And for me, I've had a lot of ups and downs. And you know what, guys, to be honest, a lot of my ups and downs are because I can't balance my own checkbook right, and I yell, and I make something out of nothing. And so, because there's people out there that actually have real ups and downs, and real's relative, right? But my heart goes out to people that, there's a medical condition, and it has nothing to do with them, or something happened in their life and in their family, and they can't control it. And, with me in my life, a lot of my problems, a lot of my downs are because of my decisions and my choices. And so, I've still seen God show up even in those places. And so, my relationship with God and the church and Jesus and all that it's pretty complex, just because I still know how to talk the talk, and pretend, and, God is good all the time, and he is, but, there's been times when I've been in church and it feels like everything in my life is flipped upside down, and I don't really know, I don't know how to articulate it with people. And maybe it's because I'm just having an off day, or maybe it's because my anxiety is kicking. But I know what that's like to just kind of, because I'm the type of person, when I go to church, I'm expecting a life-changing miracle, whether it's a Wednesday or a Sunday. I'm that type of person that I believe in one touch, God can change everything. And so, sometimes it's hard, because it's like, well, child, could you just how about just go to church and hope that it's a good song and you feel good? And I do. But I also think that, when you look at the God of the Bible, it's just littered with things that change people's lives. And so, if you guys are in a situation right now where you need something bigger than you, I implore you to just keep hoping, just hope, and have faith that maybe there's a God that's big enough. And, because, it's funny, I always took offense to the saying of, if he could do it for me, he could do it for you. And I'm like, well, just because he did it for you doesn't mean he's going to do it for me. And I don't really care about your story. And, I want God to do it for me. And so if he did it for you, great. But that, I don't care. Just to be honest. It's like the story of Thomas. Like, I've always related to Thomas, because Peter, James, and John were Jesus' favorite. And is that biblical? I don't know, but they got to go up to the mountain and Thomas didn't. And so did he do something inherently wrong? I don't think so. But there was that dynamic, right? Where, a lot of people got more airtime. And, I related to Thomas because he said, I don't believe that Jesus is who he is until I see him. And I've kind of had that a lot of times in my life where I go, listen, I get it. You guys got a healing, or in 1982, God did something, and I'm happy for you. But I need to see it with my own eyes. And it's so funny because when you look at how graceful Jesus is, like Peter blew it, and he blew it royally. And it was funny because God met him where they originally met, or where they had that in the first encounter. Jesus was on the beach waiting for him. And Peter was probably no doubt like embarrassed because he did exactly what he said he wouldn't do. And Jesus was just waiting for him, and he had breakfast cooked for him. And, I believe that conversation went, Jesus didn't really say anything. He just smiled, and Peter knew, and he's like, he's not mad at me. And Peter kind of had to work through his stuff. And Peter was wild because he ended up jumping out of the boat with his cloak on. And so, Peter loved Peter, but Thomas I relate to a little bit more because everyone else felt it. Felt it. Everyone else, they believed it, and Thomas didn't. Now remember, these guys walked with Jesus and saw him do miracles like crazy for 3 years. And so it's like we knock our faith. Like, I think today we should just pat ourselves on the back because, we weren't walking with Jesus in the physical form. They were. They saw him do crazy things day in and day out, and for years. And Thomas still had this thing after seeing all that, and that's because it's like, if you're like me and you go to church and there's a healing, day or something like that, I'm all for it. Like, I just get excited. I just love being around it. And maybe something happens, or, maybe something doesn't, but I'm down with it. And Thomas was down with it for 3 years. Like, he knew, like, I love in the Bible where it says Jesus healed everyone. Like, he goes into a town and it says everyone. And it's like, that means there was hours of Jesus praying for people, and something was changing in their life. And if you've ever been around a miracle, it's crazy because it's so natural. It's supernatural, but it's like there's almost this weird thing that happens where it doesn't, like, you feel like there's going to be like a audible voice or a big light, and it's like, no, it's like you just touch somebody and you pray for them, and then they like tell you they feel better. It's really weird. It's weird how natural it is. But back to Thomas, he saw that every day for 3 years. And then they said, Jesus, he's alive. And Thomas was like, well, that's good for you. This is Shiloh paraphrasing, but he said, that's good for you. And I'm glad that your faith is there and that you believe him. I don't. And what he needed a physical touch from God. And what I believe, when you look at the 5 love languages, it makes so much sense. I think God speaks to us through love languages. I think we all have kind of a love language with God. And I think if we're honest with him and let him prove it, he will. And in Thomas, physical touch, love Thomas because he needed to feel the touch of God. Like he didn't need a car or a house or, a relationship. He needed to feel God. And, how loving God is, Jesus, he didn't say like, you're so wrong, lack of faith, woe is you. He showed up and he just put his hands out for Thomas to touch. And in that moment, that's when Thomas, his belief was enabled. His faith was actualized. He was able to see and get what he needed from God. And so I want to encourage myself first and foremost to go, if God is that big, you guys, if God is that big, let's put it on him. Like, let's do what Thomas did. We don't have to sit in the back of the rooms and kind of just, well, I heard somebody had something, like they bought a miracle house like 2 years ago, and that's why God's good. Like, let's push to the front, and not necessarily physically, but let's leave it on God, and it's like, cause I believe God is that big, you guys. And so, thank you guys for bearing with me today, and we will be back next week, and Joey will be excited to be back. But I had fun talking with you guys today, and it was a one-sided talk. That's more of a monologue rather than a conversation. But we'd love to hear what you guys have to say. And so again, the email is info@thejoeyandshilohshow.com. And if there's anything you guys want to hear us talk about, or you guys have any feedback or anything, we'd love to hear you guys. And so I hope you guys have a blessed Sunday, and let's stay believing that the big God's going to show up in our week this week. So to all of you people listening, we love you, and we're praying blessings over your week, you guys.
Thank you for listening to the Joey and Shiloh Show. If you have a question or comment for the boys, email them at info@thejoeyandshilohshow.com. That's info@thejoeyandshilohshow.com. Make sure to tune in next week. And remember, you can listen anytime to all their podcasts by searching The Joey and Shiloh Show on your favorite podcast provider.
Estás atrapado en el tráfico, pero luego hay una recompensa para ti. Una modelo, la marca de los luchadores. Mantienes la calma a pesar de las bocinas, las largas filas y los gritos. ¡Muévete! Así que al llegar a casa, sírvete esta dorada y refrescante lager, porque tú sabes que tu paciencia vale oro. Tú eres un luchador y esta es tu recompensa. Modelo, la marca de los luchadores. Todo con medida, importada por Crown Imports, Chicago, Illinois.